I think we can move on to the next segment in our agenda as we wait for everyone to trickle into the room. To our virtual audience, thanks for hanging on and sticking with us. We will now move on to our second address from our second keynote speaker, and that is Advocate Etienne Labuschagne, SC. Okay, so Etienne Labuschagne is a practicing advocate who has been at the Pretoria Bar for the past 35 years. He's a graduate at the University of Pretoria in Cambridge and has been senior counsel for the past 17 years. He has participated in many high-profile public law matters, the most recent of which was a challenge to the Eskom tariff hike that took effect in July. He has been involved in court battles with Eskom from many angles. I could give more details, but have run out of power. Ladies and gentlemen, Advocate Labuschagne, over to you.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. The problem with the afternoon session is that it's typically known as the graveyard session. People become tired. There was an inspector of schools in KZN who was addressing a teachers' conference, and his speaking turn was immediately after lunch. And he famously said to them that we've all just enjoyed a wonderful meal of turkey stuffed with sage. Now you need to listen to a sage stuffed with turkey. If any of you are feeling a bit drowsy, don't fret. We all know what it's like to be in the middle of an energy crisis. Welcome to my talk on load shedding. The Springboks are in France preparing for an important game. And one of the players, a loose forward, has the nickname of Eskom. And I was intrigued. Why would anyone give someone a name like that? Surely not because he has power. I was told that the reason is that he'd put your lights out for you. And that's on topic. For all intents and purposes, Eskom is solely responsible for the generation and supply of electricity in our country. Eskom's ability to supply as much electricity as was needed became seriously compromised. In order to prevent nationwide blackouts and chaos when there was a risk that it would not be able to meet demand, Eskom switched off the electricity supply to parts of the country on a rotational basis. It called this process load shedding. Load shedding inconvenienced almost all South African citizens and businesses and caused most of them financial loss of one or other kind. This is a quote from a judgment. And two things struck me. The one is that the judge is referring to load shedding in the past tense. I wish. And the second thing that struck me is this judgment was delivered 13 years ago. Even then, the thought crossed the mind of a captain of industry that he's not going to sit back, take this lying down. Polyoak Packaging sued Eskom and sued them for damages and delict for failing to generate enough electricity to keep production on course. Eskom raised an exception, and the court in that matter left open this very important question: whether Eskom could be held liable in delict despite there being many other remedies in the Electricity Regulation Act. From the judgment, it's clear that the reason why the exception in that matter failed was because the court said that it can only determine whether there is a legal duty on Eskom to supply enough electricity after it has heard sufficient evidence. And what particularly concerned the court was that what would the impact be if you held Eskom liable in damages for not producing enough electricity? What would the impact of those judgments be on its continued capacity to deliver electricity? The first round on determining this important question was not answered. It was a blackout. But this year, the UDM took Eskom to court. And in those proceedings, the UDM was looking for specific declarators to protect sectors of our society who we would all regard as essential. They wanted an order declaring load shedding as impacting prejudicially on constitutional rights to health, security, and education. And a full court, that means 3 judges, granted an interim order. That is just a word in this case, it's final in effect. The judge says so. But granted an interim order pending Part B of those proceedings, directing the Minister of Public Enterprises to take reasonable steps to ensure sufficient supply or generation of electricity for hospitals, schools, and police stations. I'm sure we would all applaud this judgment. But how is effect going to be given to it? That is an important question and a major stumbling block. We now have a Minister of Electricity. He's missing in action. I've not seen any solutions that would answer questions like this. In that particular judgment, strong words are used by the full court. Let me just show you. Paragraph 37, it's clear that whatever the President and his cabinet ministers averred, the consequences of policy decisions resulted in the current need by Eskom to continue to implement various levels of load shedding. One of the parties called it a human catastrophe. On a conspectus of all the above, we find that there have been repeated breaches by the state of its constitutional and statutory duties, and that these breaches are continuing to infringe on citizens' rights to healthcare, security, and education. Now, if you get an interdict in the High Court, as they got in this matter, you have to show a right. Although this was an interim interdict, the court said that the impact of what was granted would be final in effect, and therefore the applicant had to establish a clear right, which is a higher onus. The court found there was such a clear right. What does that mean? A clear right to hold the minister accountable to ensure sufficient electricity supply. Now, if you have a right against the state that you can enforce for the provision of sufficient amounts of electricity, the converse of that is this beguiling question that wasn't answered initially, and that means that Eskom has a legal duty and the state has a legal duty to supply enough electricity. There was another challenge this year in front of the full court, a recent hearing, part of which I was involved, and it was a matter in which the DA sought declarators about load shedding. They were looking for an order saying that it's a failure of the state's constitutional duties. What that would entitle them to is that under Section 172 of the Constitution, if in a constitutional duty conduct inconsistent with the Constitution is found, the Constitution uses a word. It says it must be declared unconstitutional. Must. The court doesn't have a choice. And that opens the door for what is called a just and equitable remedy under Section 1721B of the Constitution, a mighty instrument in the hands of the court to craft a remedy that is just and equitable, and it is only bound by the question of justice and equity. Under that power, a court can, because it's just and equitable, direct that a contract found to be unconstitutional must continue because there are considerations why it would be just and equitable. It is a mighty and a powerful instrument in the hands of the court. Now, this case presented us with a cocktail of law and economics and politics. That's a heady cocktail. And the purpose of this, the second leg of these proceedings, was to try and persuade the court to appoint a special master to devise an energy solution for the country. This is a very exciting idea. Whether it will succeed, we don't know. We're waiting for judgment. But the idea of such a special master is that that special master must be what the public perceives as an honest broker. And it's also based on the premise that government has caused this problem and can't be in control of the solution. A special master who must devise a plan for the country under the supervision of the courts. So what do you have here? We have this interesting scenario of legal solutions being sought for an economic disaster caused by politicians. Eskom has been facing a number of legal challenges. One of them is the massive outstanding municipal debt. It's in the region of 63 billion. What's quite disheartening in some of the matters in which I become involved is that there is a socio-political legacy that underpins this debt. So, for example, it emerged that in the Free State, municipalities were told they don't have to pay Eskom. The state will eventually pick up the tab. The money can go elsewhere. And in the particular municipality that was in the focus of that particular matter, a new service provider who was appointed to run the electricity business of the municipality found, to their horror, that the vending machines where you would pay for your electricity were wired so that the funds would go to a front for a politician who has since fallen from grace. It didn't even go to Eskom. We can understand that these promises created opportunities for municipalities to use Eskom money for other purposes, some of them nefarious. So we have this terrible debt, part of which is now going to be absorbed by the state. That's you and I. The taxpayer is going to foot the bill. The next challenge that Eskom faced was a challenge to the tariff hikes that were announced in January. Now, we call them tariff hikes. It's actually an allowable revenue determination. Eskom has to apply to NERSA for increases. NERSA is in charge and it has to assess the application based on Section 15 of the Electricity Regulation Act. That section says that the prices and the tariffs to be determined by NERSA must allow an efficient licensee to recover his costs and a reasonable markup. 3 legs. Your costs plus a reasonable markup. It turns out, as far as this tariff was concerned, that 2 major components of increased costs weren't taken into account at all. I want to explain to you firstly, before I identify them, that the statutory test for an efficient licensee refers to someone who can identify a cost base that is shorn of irregular spending. And the case which I argued, it hasn't been decided yet, was that if NERSA itself declares in July last year that up to July, irregular spending by Eskom to the tune of 2.3 billion has been reported, should NERSA not at least ask Eskom, how much of your costs are made up of 2.3 billion's worth of wasted money? The response was, it's irrelevant. The second aspect which we thought needed to be taken into account is that to determine what amount of allowable revenue Eskom would receive, you must at least have a sales projection and then show what it will cost an efficient licensee to produce. Eskom made a sales projection that totally ignored load shedding. Now, if you and I were to look at this just from a logical perspective and ask ourselves, is your prospect of selling in the year to come going to be impacted by load shedding when you yourself, Eskom, say that load shedding this year will be no better than last year? Then it is clear as daylight that load shedding brings down your projected sales. At the same time, because of load shedding, you have to compensate by using more diesel. That component of your costs goes up. NERSA's answer and Eskom's answer is load shedding is irrelevant. They have this process where 2 years down the line, there is what they call a regulatory clearing account process. Then they'll fix up whatever wrong assumptions were made initially. Ladies and gentlemen, in the meantime, you and I are paying a tariff determined by ignoring load shedding and ignoring the effects of graft on irregular expenditure. It makes one angry. The public has a right to participate in the determination of this tariff. The public calls foul. Look at the waste. Look at the waste. And I ask myself, what was the point of them even participating if what their concerns, or their valid concerns were, could lawfully be totally disregarded? Where's the public in all of this? Out in the cold, out in the dark. So the issue of load shedding and irregular expenditure inform current debates as far as Eskom is concerned. There have been attempts to do what could be called self-help. Now, I was involved in a matter where one town in the Free State had the wonderful opportunity of utilizing the proceeds of a local solar farm to bolster their own supply during load shedding. This was made available to them by a service provider. The service provider is in control of the electricity business of that municipality. I'm going to explain that model in a moment. That contract has been running for 11 years. The lights are on. The people love the service provider. The councillors hate them because there's no opportunity for graft. There's a political resistance that can only be explained by reasons that you would rather not expose to the light. The unfortunate thing is that that's not unique, because the service provider is involved in another town, also keeping the lights on for the public at its expense, paying Eskom through the generated income from the municipality, and making sure it goes where it should, but they have resistance from the municipality. Why? Political interference. This breaks your heart, because the public is paying the price. Now, let me just tell you what happened in our case, where we went on behalf of Frankfurt to the court to say, Eskom, stop blocking us from doing something that can help the local community. The municipality would not support the service provider. They actively opposed and undermined the entire attempt to do something good for a short window of 18 months, after which that opportunity would disappear. So politics at a local level are playing into the hand of load shedding. An attempt to do something about it failed miserably. What was even more disheartening is that Eskom, where you try and supplement what they cannot supply, they do some form of a calculation where what you add goes into the national grid and you join the queue and do as much load shedding as the rest, because the pain has to be shared equally. You cannot do anything, according to them, to improve your position. That is an issue which has not yet been finally decided. To me, the result is a foregone conclusion. And another attempt to do something about load shedding also emanates from this scenario, and that is where, oh, my time's up. I'm going to finish quickly. If a municipality is in charge of its own load shedding, it can keep the water and sanitation going. In small platteland towns, it requires a rewiring and an all-important control of a switch that will give effect to load shedding. If you can wire it in a way that keeps the critical loads alive, you will not have sewage running down the streets. And that, unfortunately, is a reality. Eskom should be cooperating with those municipalities to enable them to control load shedding themselves. But the reality is, upstream, Eskom is in charge of the switch, flips it, and everything downstream goes dark. That cannot be tolerated. So self-load shedding would be a way of trying to do something about it. Now, IPPs, that's a way of trying to do something. Independent power producers, that means solar, wind, whatever. It's a way to try and resolve the problem. But let me move on to opportunities that I have identified that I think come out of this mess. Business opportunities. And the first is, as far as municipalities are concerned, to provide them with solar farms. They can be under private control, and the solar farm can be a service provider to the municipality. It will be an alternative source to Eskom. Only requirements is that it needs to be registered with NERSA, and there needs to be some consultation with Eskom. Here's an opportunity. Every municipality needs one of these. The other business opportunity is solar farms for large industry. This means that if you have a factory in Vanderbijlpark, which is paying the price for load shedding, and you have a contract with a farmer with a huge solar farm, then through a principle called wheeling, you would be entitled to convey the electricity on the solar farm to you specifically. It's called wheeling, the delivery of energy from a generator to an end user located in another area through the use of an existing distribution network. Eskom has to cooperate, but the effect of this type of transaction is not essentially that your electricity that comes out at the other end. Your electricity from the solar farm gets added to the national grid, but it entitles you to withdraw at the end user's site, and it becomes a financial transaction, but at least you're in control of the electricity supply for your particular plant. The next idea is Uber for the national grid. This same idea where you have multiple places where electricity gets generated, all sent through the national grid to specific end users. It's also this principle of wheeling, but as an industry, not isolated attempts to save what can yet be saved. Another business opportunity, splitting up Eskom. Eskom has 3 legs: generation, transmission, distribution. Generation speaks about coal supply and power stations. Transmission is what we know, what we see next to the highways. Distribution is distribution to end users. End users are either supplied by Eskom or through the municipality. Some strange facts emerge in Johannesburg. Sandton used to be part of the peri-urban areas. It gets its electricity from Eskom, not Alexandra. That area gets its electricity from the municipality, who adds a markup to Eskom's rate. The electricity in Alexandra is more expensive than it is in Sandton. How does that make sense? But that's a reality. Splitting up Eskom and introducing sanity amongst the end users is an opportunity. Privatizing municipal electricity distribution management. This company that I've referred to have had success. There are opportunities in every municipality to enter into a public-private partnership where an expert entity controls the electricity business and controls income generation and pays Eskom on behalf of the municipality, but has to maintain the entire reticulation system from the proceeds. It only earns money for itself from that component by which it has increased the normal income of the municipality. It only gets paid through the windfall. That to me sounds like a very wise program. Because there's been such a drainage of skills from municipalities, skills training for them is important. And of course, once these business solutions have been identified in South Africa, they can be exported to Africa. So let me conclude now. From the decline and the fall of Eskom, opportunities are created for energy generation. At this stage, it looks as though they are just possibilities. They are fast becoming necessities. As we look to the future, let's learn from what went wrong with Eskom and not repeat it, so that African enterprise can shine. As we look to the future, let's light a candle and think of better times to come. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. We are running a bit late, but I do want to provide opportunities for questions. Just one or two. Does anyone have a question for Advocate Labuschagne? Yebo noma cha, which means yes or no. Just one, okay? Len?
Advocate Labuschagne, in South Africa, the mineral resources have been placed under the custodianship of the state. Water resources have also been placed under the custodianship of the state. What is the probability that sunshine will be placed under the custodianship of the state? And the principle, this would mean that many private sector solar panels would be forced to make themselves available to Eskom, so as to apply the principles from each according to his ability to those according to their needs.
I think the reality is that government loves to regulate. And there will be some form of regulation, whether it is total control or not. There will no doubt be a licensing process, which they will control. But I think at this stage, government and Eskom understand that they need all the help they can get. And what I've found in litigation is that Eskom is hugely embarrassed and is being shown up by initiatives to do something. And their resistance is quite often explained by this embarrassment. It's too late to entertain that anymore. I think ideas for generation of electricity through IPPs is something that needs to be the subject of a public-private initiative. And I think that captains of industry must not stand before government as supplicants, but to offer government an opportunity to make good what it messed up.
Thank you so much for that. Any other question? Is there anything online? Lindy, where are you? Oh, there are two more. Okay, I'll take, let's see how we go. I'll take the lady at the back.
Thanks. It's probably an unfair question, but considering the resignation of the Eskom chair recently, and linking that to your green shoots or your potential solutions, how positive are you that in the short term there is something that will solve the issues, and is the political will behind it? I mean, just perhaps your general sentiment on some of those solutions that you offered. And whether there's any direction of travel that's really happening at the moment, and that's not just being paid lip service to.
My perception is that there's a leadership vacuum. And that's a vacuum that can be filled by private industry and private initiative. And I should think that progress will be made if captains of industry unite and present government with the opportunity of participating in a solution. And I think that will perhaps drive the debate more meaningfully, because Eskom still is in the throes of capture. We don't know to what degree it has been released of it, but the Zondo Commission said that the extent of capture just reported by it was almost 15 billion. So there will be pockets of resistance within Eskom to progress, but I do think that the economy of the country needs to be taken forward, and it needs to be taken forward with a degree of confidence and force that can only come from captains of industry.
Okay. So, okay, it's fine. Okay. Awesome, guys. I think we'll leave it there. Thank you so very much for coming to speak to us. I'm so pleased that at the end you presented all these ideas which are viable and they're actually solutions for what we're facing, a real crisis that affects everybody. So thank you so much for sharing your insights. Ladies and gentlemen, a round of applause for